Welcome back, everybody. Back in the studio, working on a gorgeous sunset today, starting from a nice, fresh, white, blank canvas. Got my workspace set up. You see my paint is laid out in long shapes like I tell you guys to do. Got my spray bottle. I've got my damp cotton rag in case any mistakes go on. Got my bristle brushes, all different shapes and sizes, and a myriad over here as well. All right, so let's get started. And away we go. So primarily natural bristle. In fact, all natural bristle. I'm using my spray bottle on the palette to keep that paint moist. I want to cut it down from its viscosity that the manufacturer intends, so a little less than a pudding, kind of like a melted ice cream. And then here I go, just starting to block in some colors based on my reference. Starting to work out the edges, using that spray bottle to keep things moving, keep things alive, so I've got time. This is a big canvas. This is a lot of blending that I got to try to get done before the paint sets up. So I can't allow the paint to set up. I'm going to keep giving it that glancing blow of atomized water, very thin mist of water. Okay, this is a technique you'll have to really practice because one, squeeze too many of the water and then I've got tons of drips, or it's just too loose to get a nice blend. So like a lot of things with painting, it's a feel, and you will find it through practice. Working all the edges around the entire shape, making sure there's no hard lines left behind. Now, clouds do have defined edges, but I don't want to start laying those in at the beginning of this process. What I want to do first is try to cover as much of the canvas as I can with the colors that I see in the reference and having these different fields of color blended into each other to make a nice underpainting. You've heard me say underpainting in other scenarios. I find it to always be important because it really sets the tone. It's a step one leading to many other good steps. All right, that's a pretty good first pass. So looks like things are being agreeable. Looks like I have the paint mixed to a decent consistency for blending. Not very vibrant. It is when I first put it on, but by the time I blend it out, a lot of the water has cut the vibrance out of the color. That's okay. Layering is good for things like sky because you want that depth. So I've got a lot of material here. You see me knocking that back down because I'm even doubting the ability that I would be able to blend all this jazz before it dries up. So I'm moving fast, not as fast as it looks. I have sped the film up here, but you can't hesitate. You don't have time to, I'm barely glancing back just to make sure that I'm not going too far off of what the reference is, but I'm really spending most of my time making sure that these edges are feathered out. And this is a cross-hatching motion, a scrubbing motion, which would be the dry brush on the edges to get it very feathered down to that white canvas. And every once in a while some stipple, if it suits. So if you've watched other videos from me, you know that there's not just one way to do things. It's always going to be a combination, and you're going to need to make judgment calls in the moment, like I just did. And I think you can see we're starting to get some depth right there where those two different colors have come together. It's a bit of a crude gradient, but it's already doing something. And that's what I speak of. That's why, especially with something like a sky, an underpainting is a great tool that leads you to a realistic looking sky because of all that depth. If you've ever taken photos, or even better, if you just stood and looked at a sunset, really looked at it, you know it's all about the depth. Um, Beyond the fact that the colors need to be vibrant to even begin to compare to Mother Nature, it's also about that depth. So layers are really going to serve you here. I just switched brushes because I've got some smaller clouds I want to deal with. So I picked up a smaller brush. A lot of these natural bristles, besides the art store, you can pick up what's called a chip brush from either a Home Depot or a Lowe's. And they're pretty indestructible, and I use them on murals. I use them as my natural bristles on murals for blending because they'll take a beating even on something like exterior stucco wall. So they definitely work great on canvas. And they pretty much hold their shape, and I use them all the way down almost to the metal because they continue to be useful for something even as their bristles get worn down. So I highly recommend that. It's a cost-saving measure, and they last a long time if you take care of them. Now, mind you, all during this process, I'm using the spray bottle to keep not only this moving on the canvas, as you see, but when I go back to get color, every once in a while I'm hitting the palette as well to make sure that my paints are staying awake. And I think that's what I'm showing you there. All right, let's take a quick look at the palette. As I've mentioned in other videos and in my classes, and I hope this will stick with you guys, is you want your palette looking like where you're working. So since this is all sunset, my palette looks just like that. The oranges, the magentas, and the purples that I was just doing on those passes are what's constituted into each other. So there's different blends and mixes of those. They're available for me at all times. Also, I want you to notice I've got a multitude of brushes working. So if I've got one in orange, I don't necessarily want to put it in the purpley tone. So I keep a couple going at the same time, and my spray bottle allows me to do that because they won't dry out as long as I keep misting them every once in a while. So let's get back to it. Looks like I want to get into some blue here. I've started to make some. Let's do that.
Too much water on the brush.
Brush is too wet. I can see myself flailing around. I've just picked up a new brush because that one, I either sprayed it too much with the bottle or I had dunked it in water, which I tell you guys never to do. And that's the reason. So that blue is starting to run, which would not be beneficial for a nice even blend. And see how long I'm having to work it because there's just too much liquid there. So I've added a little more paint. try to alleviate. So I should mention, without getting too far into color theory, that this is a bit more of a challenge. So now I'm up against the blending factor, but I'm also up against the fact that blue is complementary to orange on the color wheel. So anytime it gets anywhere near those orange fields, if I'm not careful, I'll get mud. If I tiptoe, I'll get exactly what the reference is saying, some muted tones. So that's okay. Let's listen to a little bit of music while I make my way through this blue. So as you can see, I'm taking special care to be very, very purposeful about how I approach the blue against the orange. Because again, I don't want to make a brown unless my reference says, and then I want to tiptoe up to it through veils of color, not just slamming some blue on top of some orange. Now I'm going to show you something here in the video that you may not think of, but I mentioned it on the palette. I've got my blue brush, my magenta brush, my purple brush, and of course my orange. This way I can keep jumping from brush to brush to try to tie these areas together. Not a bad session for an underpainting. And as we wrap up, I'm going to show you a final shot from this session. Still needs some work, came out pretty good. I went past underpainting and into kind of a finished look, but still not quite there. So it was a lot of fun. It was a great challenge in many ways. Hope you enjoyed, because I sure did. Thank you for watching. Have fun painting, and I'll see you next time.